The house stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, its pristine white walls glowing under the afternoon sun. To Sam and Lisa, it was perfect, an architectural gem with sprawling rooms, a garden full of blooming roses, and a price tag that seemed like a miracle. How could something this beautiful be so cheap? Lisa asked, her eyes gleaming with excitement. Sam shrugged, the realtor's explanation echoing in his mind. The previous owners moved out in a hurry, something about family issues. The couple dismissed the oddity, convincing themselves that they had stumbled upon sheer luck. They laughed as they carried boxes through the grand double doors, their footsteps echoing on the polished wooden floors. "This place is a dream," Sam whispered, kissing Lisa's forehead. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the house began to change. It was subtle at first, a misplaced mug here, a picture frame slightly tilted there. They brushed it off as the chaos of moving in. But then came the whispers, faint and indistinct, threading through the walls like a sinister lullaby. Lisa felt it first. She woke one night, cold sweat trickling down her face, to find her side of the bed sunken slightly, as if someone else were lying there. The closet door creaked open on its own, revealing a gaping darkness that seemed to pulse, alive and watchful. Sam, ever the skeptic, dismissed her fears. "It's just an old house settling," he said, though his voice quivered. But the house wasn't settling, it was awakening. Rooms seemed to shift, subtly shrinking. Lisa noticed the hallway felt shorter one morning, the edges of the wallpaper curling inward as if the walls were closing in. Their beloved golden retriever, Max, vanished one evening, his leash still hanging by the door. "Where's Max?" Lisa screamed, tears streaking her face. Sam searched frantically, his own dread now undeniable. The answer came when they heard it, the unmistakable sound of chewing deep beneath the floorboards. Lisa turned to Sam, her eyes wide with terror. "Sam, it's eating." The house groaned, its walls shuddering like a predator savoring its meal. At first, it was easy to ignore. A set of keys misplaced, a sock without its pair, little things that Lisa chalked up to the chaos of moving. But soon, the missing items piled up. Books, photo frames, even their favorite kitchen knife. "I swear I left it here," Sam muttered one morning, staring at the empty countertop where the knife should have been. Lisa forced a laugh, though unease prickled her skin. "Maybe Max took it," she joked. But Max hadn't set foot in the kitchen for days, his tail tucked and his body trembling whenever he neared certain rooms. By the second week, the nights grew unbearable. The house was alive with noise. Soft creaks turned into shuddering groans, like something immense shifting beneath the floorboards. Once, Lisa swore she heard faint laughter, childlike, cruel, drifting down from the attic. "Do you hear that?" she whispered to Sam one night, clutching his arm. "Hear what?" he replied, though his eyes darted nervously toward the ceiling. It wasn't just the sounds. The house itself began to change, subtly at first. The bedroom door seemed closer to the bed each morning. The hallway leading to the kitchen felt shorter, the ceiling lower. "You're imagining things," Sam insisted when Lisa pointed it out. But his voice lacked conviction, especially after their dining table shifted an inch to the left overnight. And then came the closet. Lisa opened it one morning, only to find her clothes missing, entirely gone. Not a hanger out of place, not a thread left behind. She froze, her breath hitching as she reached inside, her hand grazing something warm. The closet door slammed shut, almost catching her fingers. "Sam," she screamed, stumbling backward. When Sam arrived, the closet was empty, as if nothing had ever been there. But the smell lingered, damp earth and rot. By the third week, they stopped looking for their missing belongings. The house swallowed everything: keys, shoes, furniture, anything left unattended. Lisa found herself pacing, clutching her phone like a lifeline. "What does it want?" she whispered to herself, staring at the shrinking living room. The walls seemed to whisper back, their murmurs low and ravenous. The house had been patient, biding its time, but now it was hungry, desperate to consume. It began with Sam. One evening, while Lisa was in the kitchen preparing dinner, she heard a loud thud from the living room. Rushing in, she found Sam standing motionless by the fireplace, his eyes wide and unblinking. "Sam?" Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. He didn't respond. Instead, he slowly turned toward her, a strange smile twisting his lips. "It's beautiful, Lisa," he murmured. "It's perfect." Before she could speak, the floor beneath his feet buckled, a dark chasm opening up like the jaws of a beast. Sam screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the house. His body yanked down into the darkness, as if the very foundation of the house had claimed him. Lisa fell to her knees, gasping, her heart pounding in her ears. But it wasn't over. The next night, Lisa tried to sleep in the guest room, hoping to escape the madness, but the house wouldn't let her. Shadows shifted at the edges of her vision, creeping closer with each passing minute. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing against her chest as if the walls themselves were closing in. Then came the whispering voices, dozens of them, screaming in agony, echoing through the walls. The floor creaked, and from beneath it, a figure emerged, half-formed and shadowy, its limbs stretched unnaturally long, dragging itself toward her. Lisa scrambled to the door, but it slammed shut with a force that rattled the entire house. "Please, let me out," she screamed, pounding against the door. But the voice inside her head, the voice of the house, was louder. "Stay. We need you." Lisa spun around, horrified, to see Sam's face, pale and gaunt, peering through the cracks in the floor. His eyes, now hollow and dark, fixed on her with an unholy hunger. "It's not over, Lisa," he whispered. "You belong here too." In a panic, she bolted from the room, but the house moved with her, its walls shifting to trap her. She was no longer running from it. The house had claimed her as its own, and it wouldn't let her leave. And from the attic, a new voice whispered, "You're not alone, Lisa. We're waiting." The morning after the nightmare, Lisa stumbled through the hallways, her heart heavy with dread. The house that once felt like a dream had turned into a labyrinth of terror. Sam was gone, swallowed whole by the darkness beneath their feet. She couldn't even mourn him properly. The house had already consumed him, leaving only a hollow memory. Her mind raced, desperate for escape, but there was no way out. The doors refused to open, the windows sealed shut. The walls pulsed, as if they could feel her panic, squeezing tighter around her. She had to leave. She had to survive. With a final surge of strength, Lisa broke through the kitchen window, her hands bleeding from the shards of glass. She tumbled out into the yard, gasping for air, the sunlight blinding her as if she had been released from a prison. But the house, it wasn't finished. From behind her, she heard the low groan of the walls shifting, the creak of the floorboards. The house wasn't letting her go that easily. But Lisa was gone, running down the street, never looking back, leaving behind everything, the memories, the horrors, and Sam. Weeks later, the house was sold again, as though nothing had happened. A fresh coat of paint covered the cracks in the walls. The once terrifying creaks silenced under the weight of new occupants' laughter. A young couple, Jennifer and Mark, stood on the front steps, smiling as they unlocked the door. "I can't believe we got this place for such a great price," Jennifer exclaimed, her voice full of excitement. Inside, the house seemed to welcome them, the floorboards creaking beneath their feet, the walls stretching wide with a promise of comfort. The air was still, too still, as if the house was holding its breath. But Jennifer felt it. The strange, lingering cold in the hallways. The unsettling whispers that brushed past her ear when she wasn't looking. She paused, glancing over her shoulder. Mark was already upstairs, his voice echoing down to her. "Jen, come check out the master bedroom." Without a second thought, Jennifer followed, unaware of the dark fate that awaited them. Behind her, the door clicked shut. The house sighed, its hunger awakening once more. The house stood on the edge of town, tucked between rows of aging oak trees, its ivy-clad exterior almost blending into the landscape. To Sarah and Ben, it was everything they had dreamed of, a quaint, charming home full of character, with wide windows that looked out over the river and a wraparound porch perfect for sipping coffee on quiet mornings. They'd been searching for months, but the moment they stepped inside, they knew it was the one. Despite the old-fashioned wallpaper peeling at the edges and the creaking floors, the house felt warm, inviting. "Can you believe this place, Ben? It's like something out of a storybook," Sarah said, her voice filled with awe. Ben smiled, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "It's perfect, Sarah. A bit old-fashioned, but that's what makes it special. I can already picture us here for years to come." The realtor gave them a knowing smile. "It's been on the market for a while," she explained. "The last owners, well, there was a tragic fire, and after that, no one wanted to stay." The words hung in the air, but Sarah and Ben were undeterred. They had been looking for a home with history, and this one was rich with it, though they couldn't help but feel an odd chill as they explored further. It was as they moved into the upstairs rooms that they started to notice strange things. In one of the bedrooms, Sarah found an old photograph tucked behind the dresser, a black and white image of a family standing in front of the house, smiling as if nothing could touch them. The frame was cracked, and the photo, though faded with age, looked eerily recent. In the attic, Ben discovered piles of handwritten letters, love notes and to-do lists, scattered across the floor, yellowed with age but still legible. "Sarah, come look at this," he called, his voice trembling slightly. She joined him, her curiosity piqued, but the moment she touched the letters, a cold shiver ran down her spine. The ink was smudged in places, as if the words had been written in a hurry, and the final note, a last farewell, was dated the day before the fire. For the first time since moving in, they both felt the weight of the house's past pressing down on them. As days passed, the charm of their new home began to fade, replaced by an unsettling sense of being watched. It started with whispers, soft and indistinct, like voices carried on the wind. Sarah dismissed them as the house settling, or perhaps the sounds of the old pipes echoing through the walls. But Ben wasn't so sure. One evening, as they were preparing dinner, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of her eye. A figure, pale and blurry, hovered by the window. When she turned to look, it was gone. "Ben, did you see that?" she asked, her voice shaky. Ben looked up from his work. "See what? You're imagining things." But Sarah wasn't imagining it. She felt it. The presence, looming just beyond the edge of her vision, always watching. The whispers grew louder at night. Ben would wake to the sound of muffled arguing, like distant voices trapped behind the walls. The words were unintelligible at first, but soon they became clear. "No, it's too late. You can't fix this. You'll never leave." Ben sat up in bed, his heart racing. He looked at Sarah, who was still asleep beside him, unaware of the tormenting voices. But the room felt colder, the air thick with a heavy presence. The next day, while exploring the basement, Sarah stumbled upon a weathered chest hidden in the corner. Inside, she found old clothing, burnt, charred fabric, and more photographs of the previous owners. In one picture, a family stood together, their faces twisted in pain, as if caught in a moment of screaming terror. It was as though the photo had captured their final moments before the fire consumed them. That night, things took a darker turn. The whispers became louder, now accompanied by shadowy figures flickering in the corners of their vision. Faces, pale, hollow eyes, appeared in the mirrors, then vanished when Sarah or Ben tried to confront them. One evening, Sarah walked into the living room to find the furniture rearranged, as though someone had been moving through the house while they slept. The chairs were no longer where they had left them. The picture frames were crooked, and the family photo was turned to face the wall. A chill ran down her spine. She wasn't alone anymore. Ben, now visibly shaken, began to act strangely. He spent hours in the attic, staring at the old letters, speaking to himself as if trying to make sense of the house's history. But his words were becoming distorted, twisted by someone unseen. "We have to stay," Ben would mutter, almost pleading. "They won't let us leave." And Sarah knew. The house wasn't just haunted, it was manipulating them. The walls seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy as Sarah and Ben stood in the living room, staring at the flames that had mysteriously ignited in the fireplace. But the fire wasn't normal. It flickered and swirled unnaturally, casting distorted shadows on the walls, shadows that seemed to reach toward them with claw-like fingers. "Ben," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "We need to leave. Now." But Ben didn't move. His eyes were glazed over, fixed on the flames as though hypnotized. I can't. They're here, Sarah. They want us to understand." The whispers were louder now, rising into frantic voices, screams of terror, pleading, regret. The sounds of an argument echoed from behind the walls again, but this time they weren't distant. They were right there, in the room with them. "It's happening again," Sarah whispered, her heart racing. The house was repeating its tragic past, reenacting the events that led to the fire. The ghosts weren't just haunting the house. They were trapped in a cycle, reliving their final moments over and over, pulling anyone who dared to enter into the same horrific fate. The flames in the fireplace grew higher, casting an orange glow on the walls. But there was something wrong. The fire wasn't contained. It was spreading, crawling up the walls, curling around the furniture like a living thing. The air became thick with smoke, and the temperature rose unbearably. "We have to get out," Sarah screamed, her panic rising as the fire inched closer, licking at the corners of the room. But Ben wasn't listening. His face twisted with a strange smile, as if he had accepted the inevitable. "They're calling to us, Sarah. They want us to stay. They want us to be part of it, part of their family." Suddenly, a shadow lunged at Sarah from the corner of the room. A figure, burned and mangled, its face contorted in agony. It reached for her, its fingers clawing through the air, dragging her toward the growing fire. "Ben!" Sarah screamed, but Ben was already gone, lost in the trance of the house's dark influence. The house groaned, the floorboards splitting open, revealing the basement below, a gaping maw, beckoning them to join the past, to repeat the tragedy. The flames spread faster now, devouring everything in their path. But the fire was not just a fire. It was a ritual meant to claim the souls of the living, trapping them in the never-ending cycle of the house's destruction. And now Sarah and Ben were part of it. The fire raged around them, the walls crackling, groaning under the weight of its fury. Sarah, heart pounding in her chest, pulled herself free from the shadowy hands that reached out to drag her into the flames. Desperation surged through her, and with every ounce of strength, she fought her way toward Ben. He stood frozen, as if paralyzed by the very house that held them captive. "Ben, we have to go," Sarah screamed, her voice cutting through the chaos. His glazed expression slowly began to clear, and for a moment, Sarah saw a flicker of recognition. The house wasn't just pulling them in, it was manipulating them, using their deepest fears, their darkest desires. It wanted to trap them, to trap everyone, and repeat the tragedy again and again. Sarah's breath caught as she realized something, an answer that had been right in front of her the entire time. The letters, the photographs, the fire. The previous owners hadn't just perished in the blaze. They had been victims of something more sinister. The fire hadn't been an accident. It was a ritual, a final act of desperation by the previous owners, trying to escape the very house that had consumed them for years. "Ben, listen to me," she cried. "The fire, it's not just a fire. It's what keeps them here. It's what keeps this cycle going. We have to break it. We have to destroy the source." Ben blinked, his mind slowly processing the truth. He turned to face the fireplace, now a roaring inferno that seemed to mock their attempts to escape. Together, they ran toward the old family photo, the one Sarah had found when they first moved in, the one with the twisted smiles of the previous owners. The photo had been a warning, not a memory. As the flames reached for them, Sarah shoved the photo into the fire, her hand trembling. The moment it touched the flames, the house let out a horrible scream, a shriek that seemed to echo from every corner, every shadow. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the fire suddenly died, extinguished by a force they couldn't see. Breathing heavily, Sarah and Ben stumbled from the house, dragging themselves out of the nightmare. The front door slammed shut behind them, and for a moment, all was quiet. Months later, a new couple stood on the front steps of the house, the paperwork signed. "It's perfect," the woman said, grinning as she took her husband's hand. The house seemed to welcome them with open arms, the light streaming through the windows, peaceful once more. But deep inside, the house knew the cycle was only paused, never broken, and it was waiting. The house was everything they had hoped for, spacious, nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood, with a big backyard and a perfect view of the nearby park. Jason and Emily were thrilled to start their new life in this charming home with their young daughter, Lily. It was their dream house, one they had saved for and worked toward for years. Moving day was a blur of excitement and exhaustion, and by evening, they were settled in, except for one small thing. The guest bedroom upstairs remained untouched. From the moment they arrived, Emily noticed something odd about that room. It was colder than the rest of the house, even in the summer heat. She'd assumed it was the way the old house was built, the kind of draft that came from settling walls and creaky floors. But that night, as they unpacked the last of the boxes, she couldn't shake the unsettling chill that seemed to radiate from that door. "Mom, I don't want to sleep in that room," Lily said suddenly, her eyes wide with fear. Emily frowned. "Why, sweetie? It's just a bedroom. It'll be your new room soon." "Okay." But Lily shook her head, her small hands clutching her favorite stuffed animal tightly. "No, it's cold, and it's scary. Something is in there." Jason, overhearing the conversation, chuckled. "It's just your imagination, Lily. Nothing to be afraid of." He patted her head and gave Emily a reassuring smile. But when they went to tuck Lily in that night, she refused to step foot in the room. "I'm not going in there. It's wrong. I don't want to stay there," she insisted, her voice trembling. Jason and Emily exchanged puzzled glances. It was unusual for Lily to be so adamant about anything, especially something as simple as a bedroom. "I'll take a look," Jason said, trying to reassure her. He walked into the guest bedroom and stopped in his tracks. It was colder than ever, icy, almost unnatural. A faint buzzing sound like static filled the air, and the room felt wrong. He shivered. "See?" Lily whispered from the doorway. "It's not just me." Jason closed the door and turned to Emily, his face pale. "Something's off about that room." That night, the family slept uneasily in the rooms downstairs, their peaceful dream home now tainted with an overwhelming sense of dread. and the guest bedroom sat in eerie silence, waiting. The next few nights were restless. No one in the family could sleep through the night without being haunted by unsettling dreams. But it wasn't just any nightmares. It was the same nightmare over and over again, and it always started in that cursed bedroom. Jason, wanting to prove there was nothing wrong, decided to spend the night in the guest room himself. He figured he would show Emily and Lily that it was all in their heads. But as he lay down on the bed, an inexplicable unease settled over him. The room was unnaturally cold, colder than he remembered, even after shutting the window. He tried to shrug it off and close his eyes, hoping for sleep. But when he finally did fall asleep, the nightmare took hold. In the dream, Jason was lying in that very bed, but the room had changed. The walls were closing in, suffocating him. The door slammed shut, and no matter how hard he screamed, no one could hear him. Then, the figure appeared, a dark, shadowy figure, tall and hollow-eyed, standing at the foot of the bed. Its face was a twisted mask of sorrow and rage. Jason tried to move, but his body was paralyzed. The figure inched closer, its fingers long and cold, dragging along the floor. With every step it took, the room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in tighter and tighter until Jason was sure he was going to suffocate. And then, just as the figure reached out to touch him, Jason woke with a start, gasping for air. He was drenched in sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. It had felt too real. The next morning, he didn't dare tell Emily or Lily. But Emily noticed the change in him immediately. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale, and his hands trembled. "I had the dream, too," Emily whispered that night, her voice barely audible as she clutched Jason's arm. "I thought it was just me, but Lily, she had it too. We all did." Lily had been waking up in the middle of the night, crying, clutching her stuffed animal to her chest. She said she saw the same figure in her dream, the one that watched from the corner of the room, its hollow eyes staring right through her. The strangest thing was happening, though. As the days passed, the furniture in the room began to move on its own. One morning, Emily went to open the door and found the bed had been shifted to the center of the room, the dresser now placed near the window. The rocking chair, which had always been tucked in the corner, was now facing the door, swaying gently as if someone had just been sitting in it. No one had been in the room. The house wasn't just playing tricks on them, it was closing in. It wasn't long before the oppressive weight of the room began to consume them. Emily and Jason, desperate to get some rest, decided to confront the nightmare head-on. They would both sleep in the room together, face the terror, and prove that it was all in their minds. But that night, the house had other plans. As they lay in the bed, the air grew thick, suffocating, and the temperature dropped sharply. Their breaths came out in visible puffs, but neither of them dared move. The room felt like it was closing in on them, like it was waiting for something. Around 3 a.m., Emily woke with a start, her chest heavy, her limbs unresponsive. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. Panic surged in her throat as she realized she was trapped, paralyzed in her own body. Jason, lying next to her, was in the same state. His eyes were wide open, but he couldn't speak either, unable to even scream. All around them, the room was suffocatingly cold, and the whispers, those soft, indistinct murmurs, were louder than ever. The shadows on the walls twisted and flickered like a film reel spinning out of control. Then, in the corner of the room, the figure appeared. The same dark, shadowy presence they had all seen in their nightmares. Its eyes were hollow voids, its form a twisting black mass of rage and sorrow. It drifted toward them slowly, silently, its long fingers stretched out, brushing the edges of the bed as if to claim them. The air around them grew even colder as the figure whispered something. They couldn't understand the words, but the terror it brought was unmistakable. Emily's heart raced, her mind screaming for her body to wake, to move, to run. But she couldn't. And then Jason's eyes filled with recognition. "It's him," he whispered, his voice hoarse, barely audible. The figure, it was the spirit of the man who had died in this room decades ago. His violent death had left a stain on the house, a curse that lingered, bound to the very walls of the bedroom. He had never left, and he wasn't alone. As the figure neared the bed, Emily felt her breath hitch. "Who are you?" She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The entity seemed to smile, a twisted grin stretching across its shadowy face. "You shouldn't have come," it whispered, the voice echoing in her mind. The room seemed to close in even tighter. The floor beneath them began to groan, shifting and warping as though the entire house itself was alive. Emily could feel the walls closing in, suffocating, pulling her toward the figure. It was as if the room itself was devouring them. But in that moment of terror, a strange realization struck Jason. The figure wasn't just a spirit. It was a manifestation of the house's violent past, the rage of its last occupant, the one who had died here in a brutal, unexplained murder. And the house had been feeding on that anger, forcing anyone who entered to become a part of its tragic cycle. With every ounce of willpower, Jason finally forced his body to move. He reached out to Emily, pulling her with him as they broke free from the paralysis. And just as the figure reached for them, they leapt out of bed, stumbling toward the door. The room seemed to scream in protest, but they didn't stop. They didn't look back. In a blind panic, Emily and Jason bolted from the bedroom, their hearts racing, their limbs finally freed from the paralyzing grip of the malevolent entity. They didn't dare look back, but they could feel the oppressive weight of the room behind them, pulling, tugging, as if the house itself was unwilling to let them go. The hallway stretched out in front of them, but it felt endless. Each step they took felt as though it carried them further away from safety, yet closer to something darker. The walls seemed to pulse with a heartbeat of their own, and faint whispers clawed at their ears, urging them to return, to stay. "Get to the front door." Jason gasped, his voice shaky as he gripped Emily's arm. But as they reached the stairs, the house seemed to shift. The walls groaned in protest, the floorboards creaking underfoot as though the very structure of the house was alive, aware of their attempts to escape. The air became thick again, suffocating, pulling them back. "No, we have to get out now," Emily cried, her voice tight with fear. But as they ran toward the door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping them in the dark hallway. Their breath came in frantic bursts, their hearts hammering in their chests as the temperature plummeted once again. The house was closing in, and they could feel it. This was no longer just a building. It was a force, a presence, something ancient and cruel. It wanted them, needed them to stay, to become part of its cursed cycle. With a surge of desperation, Jason yanked at the door, but it wouldn't budge. They were trapped, suffocating in the cold grip of the house. The shadows at the edges of the hallway began to move, twisting, watching them with hunger. And then, as if the house had finally had enough of its struggle, the doors suddenly creaked open, allowing them to escape into the night. Breathing in the cold night air, Emily and Jason stumbled away from the house, their hands shaking, their minds reeling from what they had just experienced. They didn't stop until they reached the edge of the property, far from the cursed building that had nearly claimed them. But when they turned back, they saw it. The bedroom window, still lit with a faint glow, as though waiting for them to return. And in the window, for a fleeting moment, they could see it. The shadowy figure standing in the dark, watching them, waiting. The house was still hungry, and the room was still waiting.